the Industrial Canal, and Inner Harbor of New Orleans. History, description, and economic aspects of giant facility, created to encourage industrial expansion and develop commerce. By Thomas Ewing Dabney. The need recognized. For a century. There is a map in the possession of T.P. Thompson of New Orleans, who has a notable collection of books and documents on the early history of this city, dated March 1, 1827, and drawn by Captain W.T. Poussin, topographical engineer, showing the route of a proposed canal to connect the Mississippi River and Lake Pontchartrain, curiously near the site finally chosen for that great enterprise nearly 100 years later. New Orleans then was a mere huddle of buildings around Jackson Square, but with the purchase of the Louisiana Territory from France, and the great influx of American enterprise that characterized the first quarter of the last century, development was working like yeast. And it was foreseen that New Orleans' future depended largely upon connecting the two waterways mentioned, the river that drains the commerce of the Mississippi Valley at our front door, and the lake, with its short cut to the sea and the commerce of the world, at the back. When the Carondelet Canal, now known as the Old Basin Canal, was begun in 1794, the plan was to extend it to the river. It was also planned to connect the New Basin Canal, begun in 1833, with the Mississippi. This was, in fact, one of the big questions of the period. That the work was not put through was due more to the lack of machinery than of enterprise. During the rest of the century, the proposal bobbed up at frequent intervals, and the small Lake Bordene Canal was finally shoved through from the Mississippi to Lake Bordene, which is a bay of Lake Pontchartrain. The difference between these early proposals and the plan for the Industrial Canal and Inner Harbor that was finally adopted is that the purpose in the former case was simply to develop a waterway for handling freight, whereas the object of New Orleans' great facility, now nearing completion, is to create industrial development. Under the law of Louisiana, inherited from the Spanish and French regimes, river frontage cannot be sold or leased to private enterprise. This law prevents port facilities being sewed up by selfish interests and ensures a fair deal for all shipping lines, new ones as well as old, with a consequent development of foreign trade, and port officials at harbors that are under private monopoly would give a pretty if the Louisiana system could be established there. But there is no law, however good, that meets all conditions, and a number of private enterprises, warehouses, and factories have undoubtedly been kept out of New Orleans because they could not secure water frontage. An artificial waterway, capable of indefinite expansion, on whose banks private enterprise could buy or lease, for a long period of time, the land for erecting its buildings and plants, without putting in jeopardy the commercial development of the port. A waterway that would coordinate river, rail and maritime facilities most economically, and lend itself to the development of a free port when the United States finally adopts that requisite to a world commerce. That was the recognized need of New Orleans when the proposal for connecting the two waterways came to the fore in the opening years of the present century. The Progressive Union, later the Association of Commerce, took a leading part in the propaganda. It was assisted by other public bodies and forward-looking men, who gradually wore away the opposition with which is received every attempt to do something that grandfather didn't do. And on July 9, 1914, the legislature of Louisiana passed Act No. 244, authorizing the Commission Council of New Orleans to determine the site, and the Board of Port Commissioners of Louisiana, or Dock Board, as it is more commonly called, to build the Industrial Canal. The act gave the board a right to expropriate all property necessary for the purpose, to build the necessary locks, slips, laterals, basins, and appurtenances in aid of commerce, and to issue an unlimited amount in bonds against the real estate and canal, and locks and other improvements, forward, and to be paid out of the net receipts of said canal and appurtenances thereof, after the payment of operating expenses, forward, into SX charges, or 2s, fulls and 2 dockie, and 2 fixed charges for tolls in said canal. This was submitted to a vote of the people at the regular election in November of that year, and became part of the Constitution. To avoid the complication of a second mortgage on the property, the Dock Board subsequently, Ordinance of June 29, 1918, set a limit on the total bond issue. To enable the development that was then seen to be dimly possible, it set this limit high at $25 billion. New Orleans decides to build canal. The canal for which the legislature made provision in 1914 bears about the relation to the one that was finally built as the acorn does to the oak. It was to be a mere barge canal that might ultimately be enlarged to a ship canal. Its cost was estimated at $2 billion, which was less than the cost of digging the New Basin Canal nearly a century before, which was a great deal smaller and ran but halfway between the lake and river. The panic of the early days of the World War shoved even this modest plan to one side, and it was not until the next year that enthusiasm caught its second wind. Then the leading men and the press of the city put themselves behind the project once more. As the New Orleans item said, October 22, 1915, the lack of that canal has already proven to have cost the city much in trade and developed industry. Commenting on the astonishing exhibition of intelligent public spirit in New Orleans, the Chicago Tribune said that no other city in or near the Mississippi Valley, including Chicago, has shown such an awakening to the possibilities and rearrangements that are following the cutting of the Panama Canal. The awakening started with the talk of the new canal. Other papers throughout the country made similar expressions. In 1915, the engineering firm of Ford, Bacon, and Davis made a preliminary survey of conditions and how development would be affected by the canal. And the New Orleans item linked the two projects when it said, January 16, 1916, the Illinois, Lake Michigan Canal and the New Orleans Industrial Canal are complementary links in a new system of waterways connecting the Upper Valley through the Mississippi River and New Orleans with the Gulf and the Panama Canal. This system again gives the differential to the valley cities in trade with the markets of the Orient, our own West Coast, and South America. Commodore Ernest Lee Johnke, president of the Association of Commerce, issued a statement to the press January 16, 1916, declaring that the prospect of the canal brightened the whole business future of this city and the Mississippi Valley. The New Orleans Real Estate Board and the Auction Exchange, in a joint meeting, urged its speedy building, and Governor Luther E. Sy Hall, in a formal statement to the press, January 16, 1916, gave his endorsement to the construction of the canal, long sought by many commercial interests of New Orleans, and said that work would probably begin in 3 months. In August 1916, the governor dismissed the Dock Board and appointed a new one. In the confusion attending the reorganization, the canal project was again dropped. The New Orleans American, on August 28, 1916, attempted to revive it, but the effort fell flat, and the plan laid on ice until 1918. America had in the meantime thrown its hat into the ring, and the cry was going up for ships, and still more ships. National patriotism succeeded where civic effort had failed. New Orleans brought out its industrial canal project to help the country build the famous Bridge of Boats. But this new phase of the plan was far from the canal that was finally built. In fact, the accomplishment of this project has shown a remarkable development with the passing years, reminding one of the growth of the trivial hopes of the boy into the mighty achievement of the man. Ships could not be built on the Mississippi River. The 20-foot range in the water level would require the ways to make a long slope into the current, a work of prohibitive expense and as nearly impossible from an engineering standpoint as anything can be. Early in 1918, a committee of representative Orleanians began to study the situation. This was known as the City Shipbuilding Committee. It comprised Mayor Behrman, O.S. Morris, president of the Association of Commerce, Walter Parker, manager of that body, Arthur McGurk, special counsel of the Dock Board, RSS, Hecht, president of the Hibernia Bank, Dr. Paul H. Saunders, president of the Canal Commercial Bank, J.D. O'Keefe, vice president of the Whitney Central Bank, J.K. Newman, financier, G.G. Earle, superintendent of the Sewerage and Water Board, Hampton Reynolds, contractor, D.D. Moore, James M. Thompson, and J. Walker Ross of the Times, Picayune, Item, and States, respectively. On February 10, 1918, this committee laid the plans for an industrial basin connected with the river by a lock and ultimately to be connected with the lake by a small barge canal. Ships could be built on the banks of this basin, the water in which would have a fixed level. Mr. Hecht and Arthur McGurk, special counsel of the Dock Board, devised the plan by which the project could be financed. The Dock Board would issue long-term bonds and build the necessary levees with the material excavated from the canal. The committee's formal statement summarized the public need of this facility as follows. 1. It will provide practical, convenient, and fixed-level waterfront sites for ship and boat building and repair plants, for industries and commercial enterprises requiring water frontage. 2. It will provide opportunities for all enterprises requiring particular facilities on water frontage to create such facilities. 3. It will permit the complete coordination, in the city of New Orleans, of the traffic of the Mississippi River and its tributaries, of the intracoastal canal, the railroads, and the sea, under the most convenient and satisfactory conditions. 4. In connection with the publicly owned facilities on the riverfront, it will give New Orleans all the port and harbor advantages enjoyed by Amsterdam with its canal system, Rotterdam and Antwerp with their joint river and ocean facilities, Hamburg with its free port, and Liverpool with its capacity as a market deposit. 5. It will give New Orleans a fixed-level, well-protected harbor. 6. It will serve the purposes of the intracoastal canal and increase the benefits to accrue to New Orleans from that canal. 7. In connection with revived commercial use of the inland waterways upon which the federal government is now determined, it will open the way for an easy solution of the problem of handling, housing, and interchange of waterborne commerce, and of the development of facilities for the storage of commodities between the period of production and consumption. 8. It will prove an important facility in the equipment of New Orleans to meet the new competition the enlarged Erie Canal will create. A. This meeting made industrial history in New Orleans. The Hecht Plan was studied by lawyers and financiers and declared feasible. Mr. Hecht summarized the confidence of the far-visioned men in the new New Orleans when he declared in a public interview, I feel there is absolutely nothing to prevent the immediate realization of New Orleans's long dream of becoming a great industrial and commercial center and having great shipbuilding plants located within the city limits." And the item said, in commenting on the undertaking, February 17, 1918, "Millions of dollars of capital will be ready to engage in shipbuilding in New Orleans the moment that pile drivers and steam shovels are set to work on the shiplock and navigation canal." It was a time of great industrial excitement. Victory was at last in the grasp of New Orleans. The eyes of the country were on New Orleans. The cry was, "Full speed ahead." Small canal first planned. The plan, at this time, was to have a lock sill only 16 or 18 feet deep. This would be sufficient to allow empty ships to enter or leave the canal, but not loaded. The mere building of ships was thus the principal thought, despite the rhetoric on commercial and industrial possibilities. Perhaps the leaders who were beating the project into shape were themselves afraid to think in the millions necessary to do the work to which New Orleans finally dedicated itself. Perhaps they realized that the figure would stagger the minds of the people and defeat the undertaking, if they were not gradually educated up to the mark. Meeting on February 15, 1918, the Dock Board resolved unanimously to put the plan through, if it proved feasible. W. B. Thompson was president of the board. The other members were Dr. E. S. Kelly, Thomas J. Kelly, XS, and O. P. Jaron. Later, E. LaFay took Mr. Kelly's place on the board. The Public Belt Railroad Board had in the meantime, February 13, voted to pay the Dock Board $50,000 a year, and the Levee Board, February 4, to give $125,000 a year. As the plans were increased, the Levee Board later increased its bit to $925,000. Mayor Behrman, Arthur McGuirk, and R.S. Hecht laid the proposition before both bodies. Action was unanimous. Colonel J.D. Hill, speaking for the Belt Railroad Board, said, "I am glad that at last there has been outlined a plan which seemingly makes it possible to construct the canal. It will not only result in the eventual construction of a big fleet of ships, but will prepare the way for a tremendous industrial activity in other lines." The consensus has been that a navigation canal is needed to induce large manufacturers, importers, and exporters to establish their factories and warehouses here. This project will be the opening wedge. Members of the Public Belt Board, voting, besides Colonel Hill and Mayor Behrman ex officio, were Ginder Abbott, Arthur Simpson, John H. Murphy, W. B. Bloomfield, Adam Lorch, George P. Thompson, Thomas F. Cunningham, Victor Lambu, Edgar B. Stern, and Sam Sagari. Members of the Levee Board voting were William McCall Fasu, President, Thomas Killeen, Thomas Smith, John F. Muller, James P. Williams, John P. Vezien. W. B. Thompson, President, put the matter before the Dock Board. The idea, he said, according to the minutes of the meeting of February 15, 1918, had always received his approval, and he thought that the mayor would recall that in the preparation, he with the city attorney had a very considerable part in framing the same, and he had taken an active interest in the matter. He had always been in favor of the industrial canal, and he believed in the possibility of development of New Orleans through this as a terminus, and it was entirely logical that the Dock Board should do all that may lie within its power to bring about the successful consummation of this project, the only doubt in his mind being as to the feasibility of the project from the financial standpoint. It seems now, however, that a plan has been devised through efforts of the mayor and Mr. Hecht, which gives every promise of success. The cooperation of the city on behalf of the Public Belt Railroad and of the Levee Board apparently removed the difficulties in respect to the financial end. The Dock Board welcomes the assistance and cooperation of the city and of the Levee Board, but inasmuch as these boards are merely contributing certain amounts per year, and whereas the Dock Board is the obligor in respect of the principal of the bond issue, it devolves upon the Dock Board to use great caution before committing itself to any particular plan in a matter which so vitally affects the credit of the Dock Board, the City of New Orleans, and the Levee Board. President Thompson further stated that he unhesitatingly endorsed the project and that he was sure that every member of the board agreed, and the board would be glad to give prompt consideration to the particular plan in question and reach some conclusion which will ensure the realization of this great project. To estimate the probable cost of the canal, Mayor Behrman appointed the following committee of engineers: W. J. Hardy, city engineer; A. F. Barkley, engineer of the Public Belt Railroad; George G. Earle, superintendent of the Sewerage and Water Board; C. T. Rayner, Jr. On February 22, the committee reported that, not counting real estate, a canal could be built for $2,626.87. This estimate called for a lock 600 feet long, 70 feet wide, and 18 feet deep, and a barge canal to the lake. This report was first received by a special committee composed of Mayor Behrman, W. B. Thompson, Cole J. B. Hill, R. S. Hecht, and Major W. Make L. Faisou. Want W. Faisou, this committee referred it to the Dock Board, which adopted it February 22. Financial arrangements were completed at this same meeting. In order to have sufficient to pay for the land, which would have to be expropriated for the canal, and to give some leeway, it was decided to issue bonds for 3 million members, with an option of floating million members Mados, 1 million members Mados, 1 million members Milliar. A financial syndicate consisting of the Hibernia, Interstate, and Whitney Central Banks of New Orleans, the William R. Compton Investment Company of St. Louis, and the Halsey Stewart Company of Chicago, agreed to take the entire issue. The bonds were to run 40 years and begin to mature serially after 10 years. They were to bear 5% interest and to be sold at 95. They would be secured by a mortgage on the real estate of the canal site, and by the taxing powers of the state, for they were a recognized state obligation, as Arthur McGurk, special counsel of the Dock Board, pointed out in his opinion of July 10, 1918. He added, "I am likewise of opinion that said bonds are unaffected by any limitations upon the state debt or upon the rate of taxation for public purposes, that the said bonds are entitled to be paid out of the general funds or by the exercise of the power of taxation insofar as the revenues, funds, or property preferentially pledged or mortgaged to secure said issue may fail or be insufficient to pay the same." The following sat with the Dock Board and its attorneys at the meeting of February 22, Mayor Behrman, J. D. Hill of the Public Belt Railroad, R. S. Hecht, President of the Hibernia Bank, J. D. O'Keefe, Vice President of the Whitney Central Bank, C. G. Reeves, Vice President of the Interstate Bank, W. R. Compton of the Compton Investment Company, H. L. Stewart of Halsey, Stewart and Company, W. J. Hardy, city engineer, and Hampton Reynolds, contractor. The selection of the site was left, by the state law, to the Commission Council. There were a number of possible routes, and the selection was made with the utmost secrecy to prevent real estate profiteering. At first, the area bounded by France and Rain Streets was chosen. This was on February 28. On May 9, however, the site was changed to the area bounded by France and Lizardi Streets, north from the Mississippi River to Florida Walk, thence to Lake Pontchartrain. This is a virtually uninhabited region in the 3rd District through the old Ursulines tract. The site chosen for expropriation is 5 1/3 miles long by 2,200 feet wide, 897 acres. For this land, the Dock Board paid $1,493,532.24, which is at the rate of $1,665 an acre. The valuation was reached by expropriation proceedings. In the meantime, Commodore Ernest Lee Johnchey had asked to be allotted the first site on the Industrial Canal, and Dolet and Williams for the second. Both were for shipyards. The Foundation Company, which was operating a number of shipyards in various parts of the country, sent an engineer here to see if it would be feasible for the concern to build a shipyard here. Even before the pile drivers and dredges were on the job, the millions were being counted for investment in the city, whose remarkable enterprise had won the admiration of the country. The dirt begins to fly. Until the money for the bond issue should be available, the Hibernia Bank authorized the Dock Board to draw against it on open account. It only remained then to secure the authorization of the Capital Issues Committee of the Federal Reserve Board, which controlled all bond issues during the World War, to start the work. The grounds on which the authorization was requested summarize conditions that make possible a great industrial development in New Orleans, and will stand quoting. 1 Zast. A. Semi-tropical conditions, which make it feasible to work every day and night in the year. E.b. admirable housing conditions, which render it feasible for labor to live under most sanitary conditions in houses closely proximate to both the plants and the city, with sewerage and water connections, and with streetcar transportation facilities to and from the plants and to and from the amusement centers of the city. C. Ample labor supply and satisfactory labor conditions. D. Proximity to timber, steel, and coal sources of supply, with all water as well as rail transportation facilities thereon. E. State control of the canal facilities and operation of the same, not for profit, but for the economical and expeditious development of shipbuilding. Ost State Sam. 2 shipyards were established on the canal. They poured millions of dollars into New Orleans. The tremendous tonnage built in the United States during the war, and the slump in foreign trade that followed the armistice, due to financial conditions abroad, have caused many shipyards throughout the United States to close down, among them one of these at New Orleans. The other one is now finishing its war contracts, and will be more or less inactive until the demands of the American merchant marine and business in general open up again, bixt top again. If they are not used for shipbuilding, they can be used for ship repairing or building barges. And it is obvious that the same conditions that made shipbuilding an economic possibility will encourage other industrial production, especially production that requires the coordination of river, rail, and maritime facilities. The canal means millions of new money to New Orleans, as its proponents said it would. On March 12, the authorization of the Capital Issues Committee was given. On March 15, the George W. Goethals Company, Inc. was retained as consulting engineers on the big job. The services of this company were secured as much for its engineering skill, proven by its work on the Panama Canal, as for the prestige of its name. The Goethals Company, cooperating with the engineers of the Dock Board, which did the work, designed the famous lock and directed the entire job. George M. Wells, vice president of the firm, was put in active charge of the work. The dirt began to fly on June 6, 1918. Before coming to New Orleans to take up his work, Mr. E. Wells, acting upon instructions of the dock board, called at the office of the foundation company in New York, whose engineer had already studied the possibilities of establishing a shipyard on the canal, and guaranteed an outlet to the sea by the time its vessels should be finished. The river end of the site chosen for the canal consisted of low and flat meadowland. There were a few houses helter-skeltered about, like blocks in a nursery, but the principal signs of human life were the cows that grazed where the grazing was good, and sought refuge from the noonday beams of the sun under the occasional oaks that had strayed out into the open and didn't know how to get back. The middle of the site, several miles in extent, was a gray cypress swamp, with 500 or 600 trees to the acre, and always awash. The lake end was trembling prairie, marsh land subject to tidal overflow, and very soft. With dredges, spades, mechanical excavators, pile drivers, and dynamite, the work opened. A great force of men began to throw up by hand the levees that were to serve as banks for the turning basin, the lock, and other portions of the canal. This levee would keep the liquid material, dredged out, from running back into the excavation. The turning basin, 950 feet by 150 feet, was an expansion of the original industrial basin. Situated several hundred feet from the lock, its purpose is to enable ships entering the canal from the river and passing through the lock to turn in, as well as to furnish a site for the concentration of industries. The foundation company had, in the meantime, decided to establish a shipyard on this basin. Its engineers were on the ground, and its material was rolling. One dredge was sent around Lake Pontchartrain to commence boring in from that end. This could not be done on the river end. The Mississippi is too mighty a giant to risk such liberties. The 2,000-foot cut between the river and the lock would have to be done last of all, when the rest of the canal and the lock were finished, and the new levees that would protect the city against its overflow were solidly set. But a few hundred feet from the turning basin was Bayou Bienvenue, which runs into Lake Bourgogne, part of Lake Pontchartrain, and one of the refuges of Lafitte in the brave days when smuggling was more a sport of the plain people than it is now, with European travel restricted to the wealthy. So through Bayou Bienvenue, a small excavator was sent to cut a passage into the turning basin, to allow the mighty 22-inch dredges to get in and work outwards towards the lake and the lock site. The problem was further complicated by the Florida Walk drainage system, which emptied into Bayou Bienvenue, and by the railway lines that crossed the site of the canal. These railways were the Southern Railway, at the lake end, the Louisville and Nashville, at the middle, and the Southern and Public Belt near the turning basin on Florida Walk. For them, the dot board had to build runaround tracks to be used while their lines were cut to enable the dredging to be made and the bridges to be constructed. For the drainage, the plans called for the construction of an inverted siphon passing under the canal, a river under a river, so to speak. In the meantime, however, the drainage canal had to be blocked off with 2 cofferdams to cut off the water from the city and the bayou, and enable the construction of the siphon between. Additional railroad tracks, too, had to be built to handle the immense volume of material needed for the work. Roads had to be built for getting supplies on the job by truck. The trolley line had to be extended for the transportation of labor. Week by week, the labor gangs grew, as the men were able to find places in the attacking line of the industrial battle. Great excavators stalked over the land, pulling themselves along by their dippers, which bit out chunks of earth as big as a cart when they took a hold. The smack of pile drivers, the thump of dynamite, and the whistle of dredges filled the air. Buildings sprouted like mushrooms in the meadow, half a mile from the nearest water. The shipyard of the foundation company began to take form. It was the plan to finish the canal By January 1920, canal plans expanded. Work in the meantime had begun on the Commodity Warehouse and Wharf, another facility planned by the Dock Board to relieve the growing pains. Built on the canal, but opening on the river, it was to perform the same service for general commodities as the public cotton warehouse and the public grain elevator did for those products. Though not a part of the canal plan, the construction of the warehouse at this point was part of the general scheme to concentrate industrial development on that waterway. Later, the federal government took over this work and gave New Orleans a $13 million terminal through which it handled Army supplies. It is still using the 3 warehouses for storage purposes, but has leased the half-mile double-deck wharf to the Dock Board, which is devoting it to the general commerce of the port. In time, the Dock Board hopes to get at least one of the buildings. There can be no doubt but that the enterprise of New Orleans in building the industrial canal had a great deal to do with the government's determination to establish a depot at New Orleans. On May 30th, the news came out of Washington that the Dollett and Williams Shipbuilding Company had been awarded a $15 million contract by the Emergency Fleet Corporation to build 8 ships of 9,600 tons each. This was the largest shipbuilding contract that had been given the South. The firm of Dollett and Williams had been engaged for 15 years or so in the civil engineering and contracting business in New Orleans. Captain M.P. Dollett had built launches with his own hands when a young man and dreamed of the time when he would have a yard capable of turning out ocean-going vessels. The Dollett and Williams Shipbuilding Company was organized April 25, 1918, with the following officers: M.P. Dollett, President; Paul Dollett, Vice President; W. Horace Williams, Secretary-Treasurer and General Manager; All H. Guerin, Chief Engineer; and James P. Ewan, Assistant Chief Engineer. I feel that New Orleans is on the eve of a very remarkable development, said Senator Ransdell of Louisiana in a telegram of congratulation, and earnestly hope our people will continue to work together with energy and hearty accord until we have gone way over the top in shipbuilding and many other lines. The expression, over the top, had not become the pest that it and other wartime weeds of rhetoric have subsequently proven. That was a time when one could still refer to a drive without causing a gnashing of teeth. Picking the site at the Lake Pontchartrain end of the canal, Dollett and Williams Shipbuilding Company began to erect its shipyard. The plant buildings were erected upon tall piling. As the dredges excavated the material from the cut, they deposited it on the site of the shipyard and raised the elevation several feet, so the buildings were only the usual height above the ground. Both sides of the canal, it should be added, have been similarly raised by excavation material. It was planned that the ships from the Dollett and Williams yard should be sent out into the world through Lake Pontchartrain, which empties into the Gulf of Mexico. There was ample water in the lake without dredging to accommodate unloaded ships of this size. But the fact that ships 400 or so feet long and drawing, when loaded to capacity, 27 feet, were to be built at New Orleans, emphasized the belief of those directing the work of the industrial canal that the plan on which they were working was too small. Accordingly, the Dock Board instructed the engineering department to expand the plans. By June 11, 1918, the plans had been revised to give a 25-foot channel. This would accommodate all but the largest ships that come to New Orleans. The cost of such a lock and canal, George M. Wells estimated, would be $6,000, or $20 million more than the estimate for the original canal. The Levee Board promptly raised its ante to $250,000 to guarantee the interest. When the dock board floated the first bond issue of $3 million in February at 95, it reserved the option to issue another $1 million of bonds within 30 days at the same rate. For $15 million of the new issue, the same syndicate of banks offered 979A2, or 2.5 points higher than for the first, but for the other million, they held the board to the original rate of 95. President Thompson reported to the dock board June 11 that he considered these very satisfactory terms. He added, "We were able to secure these better prices and conditions because the bond market is in a somewhat better condition now than it was when we made the original contract." The contract was accepted on that date, an application made to the Capital Issues Committee for the necessary permission. This was given in due time, though there was considerable opposition. The opposition, said President Thompson, at the dock board meeting of February 26, 1919, reviewing the development of the canal plans, was inspired by vicious and spectacular attacks of certain private interests hostile to the canal project and to the port of New Orleans. Railroads, whose right-of-way crossed the canal, were the principal propagandists. They realized that the dock board could not be required to build their bridges over the waterway, and, although the Thompson board financed the work at the time, they knew that sooner or later would come a day of reckoning. The Hudson board has since then taken steps to collect several $1 million from these roads. But why build a canal almost large enough only? Why build a 25-foot lock when ships drawing 30 feet of water come to New Orleans? A lock cannot be enlarged once it is completed, and the tendency of the times is towards larger ships. Why not make a capacity facility while they were about it? These were questions the dock board asked itself, and on June 29, 1918, it decided to build the lock with a 30-foot depth over the sill at extreme low water, and make the canal 300 feet wide at the top and 100 feet wide at the bottom. To do this would cost about $1,000 more, it was estimated by George M. Wells of the Goethals Company, a sum which the dock board thought would be realized from the rental revenues of Dolet and Williams and the Foundation Company without increasing the second bond issue. This is the canal that was finally built, nearly 70% larger than the one that was begun and about 100% larger than the one originally planned. When the newspapers, and forward-looking, told the people that the lack of such a canal had cost New Orleans millions of dollars in development. Digging the ditch. No rock problem was encountered in dredging the canal. The cost was below what the engineers estimated it would be, less than 30 cents a cubic yard. But a novel situation did develop, a condition that would have sent the cost skyrocketing if an Orleanian had not met the difficulty. Louisiana is what geologists call a region of subsidence. The Gulf of Mexico formerly reached to where Cairo, now is. Washings from the land during the slow-moving centuries pushed the shoreline ever outward. The humus of decaying vegetation raised the ground surface still higher. This section of Louisiana, built by the silt of the Mississippi, was of course the most recent formation. 20,000 years ago, say the geologists, there were great forests where Louisiana now is. Among these mighty trees roamed the glyptodont, the 16-foot armadillo, with a tail like the morning star of the old crusaders, monstrously magnified, the giraffe camel, the titanothere. The Colombian elephant, about the size of a trolley car and with 15-foot tusks, the giant sloth, which could look into a second-story window. Here, the saber-toothed tiger fought with the megatherium. Mighty rhinoceroses sloshed their clumsy way, and huge and grotesque birds filled the air with their flappings. As the subsoil packed more solidly, this wilderness in time sunk beneath the waters. The Mississippi built up its sandbars again, storms shaped them above the waves, marsh grass raised the surface with its humus, and another forest grew. This, in turn, sunk. And so the process was repeated, time after time. At different depths below the surface of the ground, the remains of these forests are found today, the wood perfectly preserved by the dampness. And through this tangled mass, the dredges had to fight their way. It was a task too great for the ordinary type of 20 or 22-inch suction dredge, even with the strength of 1,000 horses behind it. When they met these giant stumps and trunks, they just stopped. A.B. Wood of the Sewerage and Water Department had already designed and patented a centrifugal pump impeller adapted to the handling of sewerage containing trash. Learning of this, W.J. White, superintendent of dredging on the canal, asked him to design a special impeller, along similar lines, for the dredge, Texas. Results from the invention were remarkable. During the 30 days immediately preceding the installation, the dredge had suffered delays from clogged suction, which totaled 133 4-hours. During the 30 days immediately succeeding installation, the total of delays for the same reason was cut down to 71.32 hours. The average yardage was, for the earlier period, 15.2 an hour of actual excavation, and for the later period, 4.45 an hour, an increase of almost 200%. The situation had been met. This was the period when the cost of labor and material began to jump. Employers were bidding against each other for men, and the government's work practically fixed the price of supplies. George M. Wells, consulting engineer, in his report of December 9, 1918, to the Dock Board, summarized labor increases over the scale when the work was begun, as follows: unskilled labor 54%, piledrivermen 40%, machinists 40%, blacksmiths 40%, blacksmiths for men and monthly 15 to 40%, for men and monthly 15%. Materials had advanced. He went on to show as follows: gravel 72%, sand 25%, cement 10%, lumber form 70%, timber 40%, piles untreated 40%, piles treated, quiles treated 25%. These increases, together with the expansion of the plans requiring a canal of maximum depth, instead of the pilot cut of 15 feet, as originally planned, the insistence of the levee board that levees in the back areas must be raised to elevation 30. Development of unforeseen and unforeseeable quicksand conditions in the various excavations, requirements of railroads for bridges of greater capacity and strength than needed, building of a power line to the foundation company's plant. Not a dock board job, but one that the conditions required it should finance then. And other expenses, besides delaying the work, made another bond issue necessary to finish the job. At its meeting of February 26, 1919, President Thompson laid the matter before the board. It decided to issue $6,000 of bonds, for which the same syndicate of bankers that had taken the other two offered 96. Liberty bonds were then selling at a big discount, and this seemed the best terms on which the money could be secured. This gave a total issue of $12 million to date, the interest on which amounted to $600,000 a year. The levee board raised its share of the rental to $550,000 to guarantee the interest. The public belt railroads $50,000 made the total complete. In the meantime, ships were beginning to bulk large on the ways of the foundation and the Dolet and Williams yards. The foundation company launched its first, the Gauchie, a 4,200-ton non-sinkable steel ship built for the French government. In September 1990, and the Dulett and Williams Company launched its first, the New Orleans, a steel vessel of 9,600 tons, the largest, turned out south of Newport News, built for the Shipping Board in January 1920. These were followed by 4 sister vessels from the Foundation Yard and 7 from the Dulett and Williams plant. The former went to sea through Bayou Bienvenue and the latter through Lake Pontchartrain. The Dulett and Williams Yard is a large one. Originally planning a mere assembling yard, the Foundation Company had subsequently developed the greatest steel fabricating plant in the South, so confident it was that New Orleans would carry through the project. And 2, the New Orleans Army Supply Base that Uncle Sam was building on the river end of the Industrial Canal was rapidly rising. The facility that was to double the port storage capacity of New Orleans when it was finally completed in June 1990. The canal is 5.16 miles long. Between river and lock, the canal prism will be 125 feet wide at the bottom and 275 feet at the top. Between the lock and the lake, 150 feet wide at the bottom and 300 feet wide at the top. It is an excavation job of 10 section cubic yards. 500,000 flat cars would be required to carry that dirt, a train more than 4,000 miles long. By September 1919, the canal had been entirely dredged, except for the 2,000-foot channel between the lock and river, which must be left until the last to a width of about 150 feet and a depth of 26 feet. Since then, the labor has been concentrated upon the lock. But 26 feet will float a vessel carrying 6,000 bales of cotton. Full dimensions, however, will be developed, and the canal, with a system of laterals and basins such as are found in Europe, will be an inner harbor capable of indefinite expansion. Overwhelming endorsement by New Orleans. When the canal was about half finished, it received the most tremendous endorsement by every interest of New Orleans in its history. The question was put squarely before the people: do you think it is a good thing, and you are willing to be taxed to put it across, and, if so, how much? And the answer came without hesitation: it is absolutely necessary to the industrial progress of the city. We must have the canal at all costs and are willing to be taxed any amount for it. On September 24, 1919, George M. Wells, consulting engineer, made a report to the Dock Board, showing that the last bond issue of $6,009 had been exhausted and about $5 million more was needed to finish the canal. This was in the last days of the Thompson Board, and it took no action. The Hudson Board entered upon its duties. October to cash, orders Stex. It comprised William O. Hudson, President, William A. Kernaghan, Rene F. Clerk, Albert Mackey, Thomas H. Roberts. Later, Mr. Roberts resigned, and Hugh McCloskey took his place. All are sound businessmen, with the interests of the port at heart. They found, in the bank, only $2,067,845. 37 to the Industrial Canal account. After deducting the obligations already made, there was left only $11,264. 43 to continue the work. Without a public expression from New Orleans, they were unwilling to incur the responsibility of issuing 5 million more bonds. President Hudson called a series of meetings of the representative interests of the city to decide what was to be done. As the people of New Orleans had decided to begin the canal in the first place, it was only right that they should determine whether the undertaking, costing 5 times as much as the original plan, should be carried through. The governor, the mayor, presidents of banks, committees of commercial exchanges, the president of the Public Belt Railroad, the president of the Levee Board, newspaper publishers, labor leaders, and prominent businessmen were invited. Likewise, a general call was made to the community at large to express an opinion as to finishing the canal. At the meeting of October 17, the city made its answer. President Hudson outlined the attitude of the Dock Board as follows. The board has no feeling of prejudice against the completion of the canal. We are in favor of it. We are anxious to complete it. It was fostered by the citizens of New Orleans. The floating of the bond issue is a simple matter, if you men think we ought to do it, but where is the money for meeting the interest to come from? The $600,000 interest on bonds now outstanding is being paid, $550,000 by the levee board and $50,000 by the Public Belt Railroad. The Public Belt share is paid from its earnings, but the levee board share is being paid by direct taxation on the citizens of New Orleans. Must we increase that tax? I personally won't object to any taxation as a citizen to pay my part towards financing the canal. I want to see the canal completed, said Governor Pleasant, but it is up to the people of New Orleans to say whether they are willing to assume the added obligation. R.S. Hecht, president of the Hibernia Bank and a recognized financial leader in New Orleans, then arose. I feel, he said, that all who have the future of New Orleans at heart must agree that we are here to discuss not whether the canal is to be finished, but how. Finished it must be, or our commercial future will be doomed for many years. If the Dot Board were to stop the work, it would forever kill its credit for any other bond issue that might be proposed for wharf development, new warehouses, or anything else. The cost of the canal is a surprise to everybody. I was present when the cost was originally estimated at $30 million with a leeway of $1 million. With a leeway of $1 million, I said then, and I repeat now, that the canal could be financed if the people of New Orleans stood squarely behind it. The cotton warehouse and the grain elevator cost a great deal more than the original estimates. So the industrial canal, though it is costing more than anticipated because of the increased cost of material and labor and the increased size in the canal, will, I feel sure, be justified by the development of the future. Are we to be taxed for 50 years for our investment of $12 million and get no return? Or are we willing to pay a little bit more and get something worthwhile? That expressed the sentiment of the meeting. The people of New Orleans, said Hugh McCloskey, financier and dean of all Dock Board presidents, have never failed to meet a crisis. It is the duty of the Dock Board to finish the canal, no matter what the doubting Thomases may say. Similar expressions were made by Thomas Killeen, president of the Levee Board, Thomas Cunningham, of the Public Belt Railroad, D.D. Moore, editor of the Times, Picayune, James M. Thompson, publisher of the Item, B.C. Casanas, president of the Association of Commerce, L.M. Poole, president of the Marine Bank, Bowdoin, president of the Whitney Central Bank, Bernard McCloskey, attorney, Frank B. Hayne, of the Cotton Exchange, Jefferson D. Hardin of the Board of Trade, William Vith Sieber, representative of the 9th Ward, Aucacies, 1000 Central, Marshall Ballard, Aucassie, Aucassie, Aucas, Quans, and Turniate. Aucas is H's, what number, Hawkasied, Clark, president, and E.S. Butler, member of the Cotton Exchange, W. Horace Williams, of Dolet and Williams Shipbuilding Company, E.M. Stafford, state senator, C.G. Rives of the Interstate Bank, S.T. DeMilt, president of the New Orleans Steamship Association, R.W. Dietrich of the Bienville Warehouse Corporation, R.W. Dietrich of the Bienville Warehouse Corporation, Edgar B. Stern, Milton Boylan, W. H. Burns, J. C. Hamilton, and about 30 other representative business and professional men. Mayor Behrman, John T. Banville, president of the Brewery Workers Union, and George W. Moore, president of the Building Trades Council, at a subsequent meeting, gave their endorsement. With only one dissenting voice, these meetings were unanimous that the industrial canal must be completed at all costs, that without it, the growth of the city would be seriously interrupted. The one protest was by the Southern Realty and Securities Company. It was made October 23 against the levee board's underwriting, the interest on the new bond issue. On that date, the levee board unanimously voted to guarantee these interest charges amounting to $375,000 a year. This brings the total being paid by that body out of direct taxation to $905,000. To provide a leeway against the engineer's estimates, the dock board made provision for a bond issue of $7p per $7, but actually issued only $5,000 worth. This was taken by the same syndicate of bankers that had taken the previous issues, but this time they paid par. That was a point on which President Hudson had insisted. The contract was accepted December 10, 1919. And the work went on, with every effort concentrated on economical construction, siphon, and bridges. As an incident in the work of building the industrial canal, it was necessary to create a disappearing river. This is the famous siphon, the quadruple passage of concrete that will carry the city's drainage underneath the shipway. It is one of the largest structures of its kind in the country. A word about New Orleans's drainage problem. The city is the bowl of a dish, of which the levees against river and lake are the rim. There is no natural drainage. The rainfall is nearly 5 feet a year, concentrated at times, upon the 1,000 miles of streets, into cloudbursts of 4 inches an hour and 10 inches in a day. In the boyhood of men now in their early 30s, it was a regular thing for the city to be flooded after a heavy rain. To meet this situation, New Orleans has constructed the greatest drainage system in the world. There are 6 pumping stations on the east side of the river, connected with each other by canals, and with a discharge capacity of more than 10,000 cubic feet a second. The 7 billion gallons of water that these pumps can move a day would fill a lake 1 mile square and 35 feet deep. 3 of the canals empty into Lake Pontchartrain, the 4th, the Florida Walk Canal, into Bayou Bienvenue, which leads into Lake Borgne, an arm of Pontchartrain. Because of this drainage contamination, the lake shore front of New Orleans has been held back in its development. Yet, it is an ideal site for a suburb, on a beautiful body of water, and just half a dozen miles from the business district. So, the Sewerage and Water Board has been planning ultimately to turn the city's entire drainage into Bayou Bienvenue, a stream with swamps on both sides, running into a lake surrounded by marsh. The Industrial Canal crosses the Florida Walk Drainage Canal. This made it necessary to build the inverted siphon. A siphon, in the ordinary sense, is a bent tube, one section of which is longer than the other, through which a liquid flows by its own weight over an elevation to a lower level. But siphon here is an engineering term to describe a channel that goes under an obstruction, the canal, and returns the water to its former level. Like the famous rivers that drop into the earth and appear again miles further on, the Florida Drainage Canal approaches to within 100 or so feet of the Industrial Canal, then dives 40 feet underground, passes beneath the shipway, and comes to the surface on the other side, in front of the pumping station, which lifts it into Bayou Bienvenue. At first it was planned to build a comparatively small siphon, but while the plans were being drawn, New Orleans entered upon its tremendous development. The engineers threw away their blueprints and began over again. they designed one that is capable of handling the entire drainage of the city, and in April 1920 it was finished. A work of steel and concrete and machinery costing nearly $750,000 and with a capacity of 2,000 cubic feet of water. A second 72 billion thousand an hour, 172 billion willion. It was a work that presented many difficulties. First, the Florida Walk Canal had to be closed by 2 cofferdams. The space between was pumped out, the excavation was made, and the driving of foundation piling begun. Quicksands gave much trouble. They flowed into the cut until they were stopped with sheet piling. The piles were from 30 to 60 feet in length, and from 3 to 5 feet apart on centers. 46 feet below the ground surface to fix chirodatum was laid the concrete floor of the siphon. The siphon is divided into 4 compartments. There are 2 storm chambers measuring 10 by 13 feet each, 1 normal weather chamber measuring 4 by 10 feet, and 1 public utilities duct measuring 6 by 10 feet. The whole structure is a solid piece of concrete and capable of standing a pressure of more than 2,000 pounds to the square foot. Its total length is 378 feet. The shipway passing over it is 105 feet wide and 30 feet deep. In the public utilities, duct are carried the city's water pipes, cables, telephone and telegraph wires, and gas mains. The storm chambers will handle the rainfall of cloudbursts. In ordinary weather, the water will be concentrated through the smaller chamber in order to produce a strong flow and reduce the settlement of sediment to a minimum. 8 sluice gates, each 6 by 10 feet, open or close the water chambers. They are operated by hydraulic cylinders of the most approved type. For sending workmen inside the siphon to make repairs or clearing away an obstruction, there are 8 manholes. 4 measure 6 by 13 feet, 2 6 by 6 feet, and 2 6 by 4 feet. As soon as the Florida Walk Canal can be deepened and a few link-ups in the drainage system can be made, the entire drainage of New Orleans, in normal weather and during light storms, will, according to announcement by the Sewerage and Water Board, be sent through this outlet. During the occasional cloudbursts, it will be necessary to send some of the drainage into the lake, but this will be rapidly flowing water and will sweep offshore. It means a great deal to the suburban development of the city. A year and a half, the siphon was in the making. Preparations for the structure cost more than $250,000, excavation, foundation, etc. The concrete alone cost $170,000. Machinery and the work of housing and installing it cost $60,000 more. 4 bascule steel bridges now cross the industrial canal. They are the largest in the city, 3 of them. At Florida Walk, for the Southern and Public Belt Railways, Gentilly, for the Louisville and Nashville, and on the lakefront, for the Southern, weigh 1,600,000 pounds each. 1,600,000 pounds each. The 4th, at the lock, weighs 1,000,000 pounds. They are balanced by 800-ton concrete blocks and concrete adjustment blocks. Their extreme length is 160 feet. The moving leaf has a span of 11-17 feet. With a 30-foot right-of-way for railroad tracks, 11 feet for vehicles and trolley cars, and 4 feet for pedestrians, they are designed to meet traffic conditions of a great and growing city. They will support 50-ton streetcars or 15-ton road rollers. New Orleans has nothing as heavy as that now, and trains a great deal heavier than are now coming to the city. No bridge in the South will support as heavy loads. The tensile strength of the steel of which the bridges are constructed is from 55,000 to 85,000 pounds to the square inch, and they will bear a wind load of 20 pounds to the square inch of exposed surface. They are operated by two 75-horsepower electric motors, 440 volts, 60-cycle, three-phase current, which is stepped down from 2,200 volts by means of transformers. In addition, there is a 36-horsepower gasoline engine to be used if the electrical equipment is out of order. To open or close the bridges will require a minute and a half. The remarkable lock. Not only is the lock of the Industrial Canal one of the largest in the United States, but its construction solved a soil problem that was thought impossible. That of the Panama Canal is simple in comparison. The design is unique in many respects. The lock is a monument to the power of man over the forces of nature and to the progress of a community that will not say, die. Because of the great variation in the level of the river at low and high water, a matter of 20 feet, it was necessary to make the excavation for building the lock about 50 feet deep. In solid soil, this would be a simple matter. But this ground has been made by the gradual deposit of Mississippi River silt upon what was originally the sandy bed of the ocean, and through these deposits run strata of water-bearing sand, or quicksand. This flows into a cut and causes the banks to cave and slide into the excavation. Underneath, there is a pressure of marsh gas, which, with the pressure of the collapsing banks, squeezes the deeper layers of quicksand upwards, creating boils and blowing up the bottom. New Orleans has had plenty of experiences with these flowing sands in its shallow sewerage excavations. How, then, expect to make an excavation 50 feet deep? Asked the doubting Thomases. It couldn't be done. The quicksands would flow in too fast. The dredges would drain the surrounding subsoil, but that wouldn't get beyond a certain depth. Furthermore, what assurance was there that the soil that far down would supply sufficient friction to hold the piles necessary to sustain the enormous weight of the lock and the ships passing through it? Undaunted by these croakings, the engineers, from test borings, calculated the sliding and flowing character of the soil, and estimated the various pressures that would have to be counteracted, balanced this with the holding power of pine and steel and concrete, evolved a plan, and began an excavation of a hole 350 feet wide by 500 feet long, gradually sloping the cut 1:4 ratio to a center where the lock 1020 by 150 feet outside dimensions was to be built. The gentle slope of the cut was to prevent slides. It had been ascertained that the first stratum of quicksand began 28 feet below the ground surface 3 Cairo datum, and was 3 feet thick, the second stratum, 48 feet below the surface 23 3 Cairo datum, and 10 feet thick. Coarser sand extended 11 feet below this, from 33 Cairo datum. The second stratum of flowing sand began just below where the lock floor had to be laid. The third layer was 80 feet below the surface, 55 Cairo datum. The tips of the piling would just miss it. Excavation began in November 1918. While the dredges were at work, a wooden sheet piling cofferdam was driven completely around the lock and about 125 feet from the edge of the bank to cut off the first quicksand stratum. About 50 feet further in, when the excavation was well advanced, a second ring of sheet piling was driven to cut off the second stratum, which carried a static pressure of 55 feet and was just a foot or so below where the floor of the lock would be. It was not thought necessary to cut off the third stratum. The excavation was made in the wet. When it was finished, the dredges moved back into the canal, the entrance closed, and the work of unwatering the lock site began. This was in April 1919. There had never been such a deep cut made in this section. Consequently, the character of the soil, while it could be estimated, could not be known absolutely, and the exact pressure of the gas could not be known. The sands proved to be more liquid and the gas pressure stronger than anticipated. Quicksands ran through the sheet, piling as through a sieve. The walls of the excavation began to slough and cave. The gas pressure became alarming when the weight of earth and water was taken off. Sand boils began to develop at the bottom. The floor of the cut was blowing up. The fate of the industrial canal hung in the scale. To meet the situation, the engineers pumped a great volume of water into the excavation. Its weight counterbalanced the earth pressure of the side and the gas pressure of the bottom. Then another ring of sheet piling was driven inside the other two. This one was of steel, and the walls were braced apart by wooden beams 10 inches square and 15 feet apart in both directions. This is one of the largest cofferdams of steel ever driven. As an added precaution against the danger of a blowout by the third stratum of quicksand, which had a static head of 75 feet, 100 TNT inch, artesian wells were driven inside the steel cofferdam. 56 similar wells were driven between the steel and the wooden cofferdams to dry out the second stratum of quicksand, as much as possible, and lessen its flowing character. In November 1919, the work of unwatering the lock site again began. Only 1 foot every other day was taken off. Engineers watched every timber. It was not until January 4, 1920, that the unwatering was complete. Only in one place had there been any movement. A section of the wooden sheet, piling about 300 feet long, bulged forward, a maximum distance of 3 inches, when the bracing caught and stopped it. Then began the work of driving the 24,000 piles on which the lock was to be floated. They are 60 feet long and their tips are 100 feet below the surface of the ground. In March 1920, the work of laying the concrete began. The work was done in 15-foot sections, for only a few of the braces could be moved at one time. When it was finished in April 1921, the lock was in one piece, a solid mass of steel and stone, 80 feet long, 1,020 feet long, 150 feet wide, and 68 feet high, weighing with its gates and machinery 225,000 tons, and filled with water 350,000 tons. The concrete floor of the lock is 9 to 12 feet thick, the walls 13 feet wide at the bottom, decreasing to a 2-foot width at the top. 6,000 tons of reinforcing steel were used in the construction, and 125,000 barrels of cement. There are 90,000 cubic yards of concrete in the structure. 2.5 million feet of lumber were used in building the forms. Usable dimensions of the lock are 640 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 30 feet at minimum low water of the river deep. The top of the lock is 20 feet above the natural ground surface and 6 feet above the highest stage of the Mississippi River on record. To the top, the ground will be sloped on a 150-foot series of terraces. This will brace the walls against the pressure of water within the monolith. It will be developed to a beautiful park. Heavy anchor columns of concrete will hold the walls against the pressure of these artificial hills when the lock is empty. Traffic crosses the canal here by a steel bascule bridge, 65 feet wide, with 2 railroad and 2 streetcar tracks, 2 vehicle roadways, and 2 ways for pedestrians. INSW concrete viaducts lead to the bridge. Gas and water mains, sewer pipes and telephone, telegraph and electric wires pass under the lock in conduits cast in the living concrete. Water is admitted into and drained from the lock by culverts cast in the base. These are 8 by 10 feet, narrowing at the opening to 8 by 8 feet, and closed by 8 sluice gates, each operated by a 52 horsepower electric motor. There are 5 sets of gates to the lock. They are built of steel plates and rolled shapes, 4.5 feet thick and weighing 200 tons each. And there is an emergency dam weighing 700 tons, which in case of necessity can be used as a gate. 4 pairs of the gates are of 55-foot size, one of 42 foot. Each gate is operated by a 52 horsepower electric motor. When open, the gates fit flush into the walls of the locks. In the emergency dam is the refinement of precaution, designed as it was to save the city from overflow in the remote event of the lock gates failing to work during high water, and to ensure the uninterrupted operation of the lock in normal times if the gates should be sprung by a ship or otherwise put out of commission. This dam consists of 8 girders or sections, 80 feet long, 3 feet wide, and 6 feet high. They weigh 90 tons each. They are kept on a platform near the river end of the lock. Nearby is the crane with a 300 horsepower motor that picks up these girders and drops them into the slots in the walls of the lock. To set this emergency dam is the work of an hour. A ship passing through the lock will not proceed under her own power. There are 6 capstans, 2 at each end of the lock and 2 at the middle, each operated by a 52 horsepower electric motor and capable of developing a pull of 35,000 pounds, which will work the vessels through. The lock complete, counting the bridge and approaches, cost 7 million optret. 1.5 million of this is for machinery, and 56,000 for the approaches. Henry Goldmark, the New York engineer who designed the gates of the Panama Canal and the New Orleans Industrial Canal, in a letter of March 24, 1921, to the engineering department of the Dock Board, comments as follows on the remarkable lock. I was much impressed by the uniformly high grade of construction of the lock, the systematic and energetic way in which the work was being carried on, and especially by the admirable spirit of teamwork shown by the employees of the Dock Board of different grades, as well as the contractors, superintendents, and foremen. The desire to get the best possible results in all the details, at the least cost, was manifest throughout. The unique method used for carrying on the very difficult and risky work of excavation has attracted much professional attention in all parts of the country. Its successful completion is very creditable to all concerned in the inception and carrying out of the method used. The concrete work gives the impression of lightness, as well as strength, as though every yard of concrete was doing its special share of the work without overstraining, which is, of course, the characteristic of well-designed reinforced masonry. The outer surfaces are particularly smooth and well finished, more so than in any work I have recently seen. The erection of the gates, valves, operating machinery, and the protective dam has kept up closely with the concrete work so that no delays need be apprehended at the close of the construction period. The shop and field work in the lock gates is excellent. The rivet holes match well, and the rivet heads appear to be tight and well formed. The gate leaves seem very straight and true. The lock was designed by George M. Wells of the George W. Goethals Company, assisted by R.O. Comer, designing engineer of the Dock Board, and approved by General Goethals. The methods employed to unwater the lock were devised by Mr. Wells, H. Great. Devereux O'Reilly, chief engineer of the Dock Board, to November 1919, had charge of the details of installing the unwatering and safety devices. He was succeeded by General Arsène Parilliat, who supervised the final unwatering process. Upon his death in October 1920, he was succeeded by J.F.F. Coleman and Company, in charge of the engineering department, and H.M. Gallagher, chief engineer, under whom work is being brought to a conclusion. From first to last, Tylee S. McChesney, Assistant Secretary and Treasurer of the Dock Board, rendered intelligent and invaluable service, gathering together and holding the threads of the enterprise, and attending promptly to the multitude of details connected with the prosecution of the work. The lock was formally dedicated May 2, 1921, a ceremony that was the feature of the Mississippi Valley Association's convention in New Orleans. With the dredging of the channel between the river and the lock, a work that should be finished before January 1922, ships will be able to pass from the Mississippi into Lake Pontchartrain. Then, New Orleans can plan its next great development. New channel to the Gulf. George M. Wells, George R. Goethals, son of the General, Colonel E. J. Dent, USS. District engineer at New Orleans, and other engineers who have studied the problem, say that the dredging of a channel from the Industrial Canal to the Gulf through Lake Pontchartrain, or the marshes, is feasible, comparatively cheap, and maintenance would be simple. This would shorten the distance from New Orleans to the sea by about 50 miles, and would be a vast saving for ships. It is one of the objects towards which the Hudson Dock Board is working. It is Uncle Sam's recognized duty to develop and maintain harbors and channels to the sea. Distance is obviously an important factor. Furthermore, the proposed new outlet would be an important link in the Intracoastal Canal, connecting with the Warrior River section of Alabama, which the government is developing between the Atlantic and Gulf coasts. A bill was introduced in the Senate in 1920 by Senator Ransdell of Louisiana, providing for the development of the proposed channel. It was not pressed because the canal was far from completed. However, every effort will be made by the Dock Board from now on to have Uncle Sam take hold. Colonel Dent has for a number of months been studying the feasible routes. He, by the way, is thoroughly convinced of the value of the Industrial Canal to the development of New Orleans and the commerce of the nation, and has so expressed himself in public. The Pontchartrain route has been laid off by engineers, beginning at the canal, paralleling the south shore of the Lake Pontchartrain to the south draw of the Southern Railway Bridge, thence to the Rigolets to Cat Island Pass, from there to Cat Island Channel, and so to the deep water of the Gulf, a total distance of 75 miles. Soundings and surface probings have been taken at frequent intervals over the entire route. These have shown the engineers the following. 3/4 of a mile from the south shore of the lake and as far as the railroad drawbridge, a hard bottom is found. The material is principally packed sand, rather fine, with a small amount of clay and occasionally some broken shells. Beyond this distance from the shore, the bottom is softer, consisting of mud mixed with sand. From the bridge over the remainder of the route, the bottom, with the exception of a few sand pockets, is soft, a blue mud with a large percentage of sand. This soft material has so much tenacity, however, that current and wave wash, which tend to fill up artificially dredged channels, would affect only the surface. The government is conducting large dredging operations in Mobile Bay, Gulfport Channel, Atchafalaya Bay, and the Houston Ship Channel. An outline of the results there will show how feasible the dredging of the Pontchartrain Channel would be, and how much cheaper in comparison. The channel connecting Mobile Bay with the Gulf of Mexico has a bottom very soft, for the most part, and with a small percentage of sand. Towards the outer end, the material is black mud, about equal in consistency to the softest material found in the Pontchartrain route. A sounding pole with a 4-inch disc on the end can be easily pushed 3 or 4 feet into the mud and pulled out again. Wave and current action cause the channel to shoal at the rate of 78,000 to 132,000 cubic yards per mile per year, depending on the softness of the bottom and the depth. Where the highest rate obtains, the surrounding material consists of soft mud without a trace of sand. Experience shows that where there is a fair percentage of sand in the material adjacent to the channel bed, the shoaling is lessened. In general, the material along the Pontchartrain route contains a greater percentage of sand and is far more tenacious than that along the Mobile Bay Channel. Furthermore, the Pontchartrain route is not exposed to such strong cross-currents. The Gulfport Channel is dredged through very soft material, a grayish-blue mud of oozy consistency into which the sounding pole penetrates 6 feet with very little exertion. On top, a small amount of sand is found, but practically none in the lower stratum. The material is considerably softer than any encountered on the Pontchartrain route, except for one small stretch. Yet the shoaling is not great. Where the shoaling is heaviest, between the end of the pier and Beacon 10, only about 700,000 cubic yards a mile has to be dredged out every year to maintain the channel. From Beacon 10 out, the average annual maintenance is less than 200,000 cubic yards a mile. Except for the 4-mile stretch west of the inner entrance to the Cat Island Channel, the bottom, on the Pontchartrain route, is harder than that of the Gulfport Channel. Therefore, it is reasonable to conclude that the maintenance of the Pontchartrain Channel would not average as high as the outer portion of the Gulfport Channel. The Atchafalaya Bay Ship Channel, extending from the mouth of the Atchafalaya River across the shoal waters of Atchafalaya Bay to about the 20-foot contour of the Gulf, a distance of 15 miles, is through a material of slushy mud, with occasional thin pockets of sand. The shoaling runs from 540,000 to 1,680,000 cubic yards a mile a year. The highest rate is obtained in shallow water. Except in the stretch mentioned, the material on the Pontchartrain route is not as soft as on the Atchafalaya, nor are the depths as shoal, nor is there the exposure to cross currents. In the Houston Ship Channel, the material is composed of soft mud with a small amount of sand. A 2-mile stretch through Redfish Reef is practically self-maintaining. For the remainder of the channel, during the 6 years from 1915 to 1920, a total excavation of 13,574,000 cubic yards was necessary to maintain the depth. This is equivalent to 100,000 cubic yards a mile a year. In summary, then, 1. The Lake Pontchartrain route is practically unexposed to cross currents, as is the case with the Mobile Bay, Gulfport, Atchafalaya, and, to a certain extent, the outer portion of the Houston Ship Channels. 2. The material along and on the sides of the Pontchartrain route is, with the exception of a small stretch, more tenacious, and contains, in general, a greater proportion of sand than in the case of the neighboring channels mentioned. The channel could therefore be more easily maintained. Engineers estimate that a channel with a 300-foot bottom would be needed. On the south shore of the lake, the side slopes should be on the 1:3 ratio, with provision for a 1:5 ratio at the end of 5 years. Dumped on shore, the material would reclaim considerable frontage and eliminate the redeposit of this material in the channel. Through the remainder of the route, the original excavation should be made with side slopes on the 1:5 ratio, with provision made for a 1:10 ratio in 5 years. The dredging of the 75 miles of the Pontchartrain Channel would amount to 97,200,000 cubic yards, it is estimated by engineers. The cost would be around $10 million. The annual maintenance during the first 5 years would amount to $8 second at an 80,000 cubic yards, an estimate based on a comparison with the other channels into the Gulf and the character of the material to be excavated. This estimate is considered large, but even at that, it is only 11,400 cubic yards a mile a year, and the cost would be about $750,000 according to Colonel Dent. After 5 years, it would be less. Another proposed route, investigated by Colonel Dent, is through Lake Bourne. A canal some miles in length through the marsh would connect the lake with the industrial canal. This route has considerable maintenance advantages over the Pontchartrain route. The character of the bottom in Bourne is more or less the same as in Pontchartrain. Sooner or later, one of these channels will be built by the government. That it has not already been begun is due to the fact that the canal has not yet been completed and the expected development has not taken place. Why government should operate canal. It is the function of the state to provide port facilities in the form of docks, piers, warehouses, grain elevators, mechanical equipment, etc. But it is the duty of the national government to improve harbors, dredge streams, dig canals for navigation and irrigation, erect levees to protect the backcountry, and build locks and dams when needed. These are the premises from which the Hudson Dock Board reasons that the cost of construction and maintenance of the New Orleans Navigation Canal and Inner Harbor should be assumed by Uncle Sam. It will leave no stone unturned to have him assume the obligation. The Navigation Canal is essentially a harbor improvement. It enables practically unlimited industrial development and commercial interchange. It is an important link in the Intracoastal Canal system, which the government is developing to provide an inland waterway from Boston, Mass., to Brownsville, Tex. And, with the dredging of a channel through Lake Pontchartrain to the Gulf, a problem which U.S. engineers have been studying for some time and an undertaking which they have found feasible, it will put the nation's second port about 50 miles closer to the sea. It has considerable military value. Its purpose is, therefore, national. The local interests are secondary. It is no new principle, this obligation of the government. That duty has been recognized by Congress since the United States was. Any rivers and harbors bill will show great and useful expenditure for waterways improvement. The Panama Canal, built by the government, is the greatest example. Coming closer home, there is South Pass at the mouth of the Mississippi. A bar with a 9-foot depth of water blocked the commerce of New Orleans. Under the Rivers and Harbors Act of 1875, Captain James B. Eads was paid $8 billion for building the famous jetties to provide a 26-foot channel. Since then, the channel has been deepened to 33 feet. In more recent years, the government began to improve Southwest Pass, the westernmost mouth of the Mississippi. A 9-foot bar was there too. To increase the depth to 35 feet, the government spent, up to 1919, about $15 million and is still spending. Just as the purpose of the improvements of these channels was to bridge the distance from deep water to deep water, says Arthur McGurk, special counsel of the Dock Board, in a report of February 23, 1921, to the board, so is the purpose of the Navigation Canal to bridge the distance from the deep water of the river to the proposed deep water channel of the lake. In the annual report of the Chief of Engineers, USA, for the fiscal year ending June 30, 1919, are listed the following waterways: improvements and canal developments being made by the government, operating and care of canals 3596566, c. all, 46. Cape Cod Canal, purchase authorized River and Harbors Act, August 8, 1917, cost not exceeding $10 million, and enlargement, $5 million. Jamaica Bay Channel, 500 feet width, 10 feet depth, to be further increased to 1,500 feet width entrance channel and 1,000 feet interior channel, maximum depth of 30 feet, length of channel 12 miles. Approved estimate of cost to United States not to exceed $7,430,000. 1488, 60th Congress. Ambrose Channel, New York Harbor, Appropriation New Work and Maintenance, 4,924, 5,000 thous. 88, year ending June 30, 1909. Bay Ridge and Red Hook Channels, 4,471.17. Locks and dams on Coosa River, Alabama, Georgia, 1,700.9017. 14. Channel connecting Mobile Bay and Mississippi Sound, Act of June 13, 1902, original project, for construction and maintenance, total cost $7,089.82. 42. Black Warrior River, 17 locks, mobile to Sanders Ferry, 443 miles. Total to date, $18,101,295. Indefinite appropriation. Sabine Pass, Act of June 19, 1906 and prior, channels, turning basins and jetties, March 2, 1907, and previously, total appropriations, $1,875 5,017. Trinity River, Galveston, north, 37 miles, locks and dams. Act of June 13, 1902, House Document 409, 56th Congress. Estimate cost complete canalization of river, revised 1916, in addition to amounts expended prior to rivers and harbors. Act of July 1916, in round numbers, $113,016,000. Estimated annual cost of maintenance, $200,000. Houston to Galveston Ship Canal, Act of July 25, 1912, and July 27, 1916. Cost, $3,000,000. Annual maintenance, $325,000. Rock Island Rapids Ill and LeClaire Canal, rock excavations, etc., Act of March 2, 1907, dams, 3 locks, etc., to June 30, 31 1-hour rate, 1930-85. 62 and 130-15-8. 03 for 1-year maintenance. Keokuk, Iowa, formerly Des Moines Rapids Canal, Old Project, Act of June 23, 1866, 4574-957, CO dollars, $0, Flane. Muscle Shoals Canal, Tennessee River, 36, 6 miles, depth, 5 feet, 4743-4084. 5T, exclusive of cost of nitrate plant. Locks and dams on Ohio River, Act of March 3, 1879, to Act of March 30, 1907, including purchase of Louisville and Portland Canal, 17,677-273. 78. Estimated cost of new work, widening Louisville and Portland Canal, and changes in dams, 63,731-488, or 88. Annual maintenance covering only lock forces and cost of repairs and renewals, $10,000. Active June 25, 1920. House Document 1419. 4 Session Mentry. Also Act of March 4, 1915. House Document 1695. 64th Congress, 2nd Session. Ship channel connecting waters of Great Lakes, including St. Mary's River, Sault Ste. Marie Locks, St. Clair and Detroit Rivers, locks and dams, total appropriations to June 30, 1919, 26,020,000 36.9. 68. Estimate new work $24.85. St. Clair River, connecting Lakes St. Clair and Erie, shoalest part, was 12,112 to 15 feet. Improved at expense of 13,252,254. AE0. Estimated cost of completion, 2,720,000. Niagara River, 15,785,007 7/3. Los Angeles and Long Beach Harbor, 4,492,809. Seattle, Lake Washington Ship Canal, in City of Seattle, from Puget Sound to Lake, original project, Act of August 18, 1894. Double lock and fixed dam. Length about 8 miles. Total appropriation to date, 3,345, 15 balls. These are only some of the larger projects. Of course, there are a great number of such works all over the country, constructed and maintained by the United States, sometimes alone, and again by cooperation with local authorities. New Orleans was founded because of the strategic value of the location, both from a commercial and a military standpoint. The power that holds New Orleans commands the Mississippi Valley, a fact which the British recognized in 1812 when they tried to capture it. Likewise, when Farragut captured New Orleans, he broke the backbone of the Confederacy. Mr. McGurk, in the report to which reference has already been made, discusses the military importance of the industrial canal as follows. A ship canal, connecting the river and the lake at New Orleans, will be a Panama or a keel canal, in miniature and double in effectiveness, the naval forces defending the valley, as they may be moved to and fro in the canal from the river to the lake. On this line of defense, heavy artillery on mobile mounts can be utilized, in addition to heavy ships of the line. That is to say, just as light draft monitors and even floats carrying high-powered rifles were used effectively on the Belgian coast, on the Piave River in Italy, and on the Tigris in Mesopotamia, so may they be used in the defense of the valley, on any canal connecting the Mississippi River and Lake Pontchartrain. Changes are constantly occurring in the details of work of defense due to development of armament, munitions, and transport. The never-ending development of range and caliber has assumed vast importance, particularly with reference to the effect on the protection of cities from bombardment. Naval guns are now capable of hurling projectiles to distances of over 50,000 yards, 28 to 30 miles. For the protection of the valley, we should have at New Orleans armament mounted on floating platforms which will hold the enemy beyond the point where his shells may not reach their objective, and in this operation, the canal, affording means of rapid transport, will render invaluable and essential service. A country's ports are its water gates. Their local importance is comparatively small. They are important or not according to whether they are on trade routes and easily accessible. An infinitesimal part of the trade that flows through New Orleans originates or terminates there. The backcountry gets the bulk of the business. The development of the harbor is for the service of the interior. It is essentially national. From every point of view, therefore, it is the duty of the national government to take over the navigation canal and release the moneys of the state, so they may be devoted to the improvement of the waterway with wharves and other works in aid of the nation's commerce. Economic aspect of canal. Tied to the Mississippi Valley by nearly 14,000 miles of navigable waterways, and the largest port on the Gulf Coast, and the most centrally situated with respect to the Latin American and Oriental trade, New Orleans is naturally a market of deposit. The development of the river service, in which the government set the pace in 1908, is restoring the north and south flow of commerce after a generation of forced haul east and west, along the lines of greatest resistance, and New Orleans has become the nation's second port. Its import and export business in 1920 amounted to $1 billion. 90% of the nation's wealth is produced in the valley, of which New Orleans is the maritime capital. It is the source of supply of wheat, corn, sugar, lumber, meat, iron, coal, cotton oil, agricultural implements, and many other products. It is a market for the products of Latin America and the Orient. With the coordination of river, rail, and maritime facilities and sufficient space for development, it is inevitable that New Orleans should become a mighty manufacturing district. Such enterprises as coke ovens, coal byproduct plants, flour mills, iron furnaces, industrial chemical works, iron and steel rolling mills, shipbuilding and repair plants, automobile factories and assembling plants, soap works, packing plants, lumber yards, building material plants and yards, warehouses of all kinds, etc., would be encouraged to establish here if given the proper facilities, and the industrial canal is the answer to this need. For, under the laws of Louisiana, private industries cannot acquire or lease property on the riverfront. Even before the completion of the canal, the dream has been partly realized, with the establishment of 2 large shipyards on the canal, which otherwise would have gone somewhere else, and the building of the Army supply base on the same waterway, largely due to the enterprise of the port. As Colonel E.J. Dent, U.S. District Engineer, said before the Members' Council of the Association of Commerce, February 17, 1921, the industrial canal will be the means of removing the handicaps on New Orleans's foreign trade. I hold no brief for the industrial canal, he continued, but speaking as one who has no interest in it, but who has studied the question deeply, I will say that 5 years from now, if you develop the industrial canal as it should be developed, you will be wondering how on earth you ever got along without it. Before the Constitutional Convention of Louisiana on April 4, 1921, he elaborated this thought as follows: "The industrial canal will furnish to New Orleans her greatest need. It should be possible to build docks there where the entire cargo for a ship may be assembled. Under present conditions in the river, it is often necessary for a ship to go to 3 or 4 docks to get a complete cargo. Last year there passed through the port of New Orleans 11,000 tons of freight valued at 1,000 millions. All files, Sobry, 60s million. This required 1,000 loaded freight cars a day passing over the docks, 15 solid trainloads of freight each day. The inbound freight was about 5 million tons and the outbound about 16 million. This is extraordinarily well balanced for any port in the United States. This would mean about 5,000 steamers of an average capacity of 2,000 tons. The proper place to assemble a cargo is on the docks. Last year, the dock board allowed but 7 days for assembling the cargo for a ship, only 7 days for assembling 250 carloads of stuff. Then last year, the dock board would not assign a ship a berth until it was within the jetties. These are some of the difficulties. What New Orleans needs is 50 to 100% more facilities for her port. Last summer, the port of New Orleans was congested, but she held her own because other ports were congested. If you want to hold your own, you must improve your facilities. Wharves can be built a great deal cheaper on the fixed-level canal with its stable banks, and that is the only place specialized industries can secure water frontage. Sooner or later, the government will adopt the free port system, by which other countries have pushed their foreign trade to such heights. Free ports have nothing to do with the tariff question. They are simply zones established in which imports may be stored, repacked, manufactured, and then exported without the payment of duties in the first place, duties for the refund of which the present law makes provision, but only after vexatious delays and expensive red tape. Precautions are taken to prevent smuggling. In the preliminary investigations and recommendations made by the Department of Commerce, New York, San Francisco, and New Orleans have been designated as the first free ports that should be established. With the ample space it offers for expansion, the industrial canal is the logical location for the free zone. Counting the $15 million contract of the Dolet and Williams shipyard, the $5 million contract of the Foundation Company shipyard, the $13 million Army supply base, the industrial canal has already brought $30 million of development to New Orleans, 60% more than the cost of the undertaking. More than half of this was for wages and material purchased in New Orleans. The state has gained hundreds of thousands of dollars in taxes. About half the money spent on the industrial canal was wages and helped to increase the population, force business to a new height, raise the value of real estate, and make New Orleans the financial stronghold of the South. What indirect bearing on bringing scores of other industries to New Orleans, which did not require a location on the waterway, the building of the industrial canal has had, there is no way of ascertaining. Since the work was begun, the Dock Board has received inquiries from 100 or so large enterprises regarding the cost of a site on the canal. That they have not established there is due to the fact that the canal has not yet been completed, and the Dock Board has announced no policy. It is now working on that question with representatives of the Association of Commerce, Joint Traffic Bureau, Clearinghouse Association, Cotton Exchange, Board of Trade, and Steamship Association. There is no use trying to guess at what the policy will be. It is too big a problem and must be worked out very carefully, with reference to a confusing tangle of cross-interests. Two principles have already been categorically laid down by President Hudson and endorsed by the Dock Board at an open meeting of April 5, 1921, with the commercial and industrial interests of the city, planning for the policy of the canal. First, that the development of the canal shall not be at the expense of the river. Wharf development will be pushed on the river to meet the legitimate commercial demands of the port. No one is to be forced on the canal. That would hurt the port. It is not thought that such forced development would be necessary, and the canal will be kept open for the specialized industries that can best use the coordination of the river, rail, and maritime facilities. Second, that the control of the property along the canal, owned by the Dock Board, will not go out of the hands of the board. There will be long-term leases up to 99 years, but no outright sale. Furthermore, the private land on the other side of the Dock Board's property will not be allowed to be developed at the expense of the state's interests. So the frontage on the canal will be developed before there is any extensive construction of lateral basins and slips. What will be the rate charged for a site? Will it be based on the actual cost of the canal and its maintenance? Or will the state consider it a business investment like a road or street and charge the property owners thereon less than the cost of construction, collecting the difference in the general progress? That, too, is a question which calls for considerable study before it can be answered. With the industrial canal open, sites available on long leases to business enterprise, and with our tax laws relating to the processes of industry and commerce revised and made more favorable, New Orleans will enter a period of expansion and development on a scale hardly yet dreamed of by her most far-visioned citizens, with enlarged profit and opportunity for all her people. new taxable wealth will be created rapidly. New needs for taxable property will arise. The tax burden on all will be distributed more widely, and when contrasted with the earning power of such property, will become less and less of a burden. This will be so because the water frontage through which the canal is being created for the attraction of many enterprises which cannot locate on the riverfront is all within the limits of the city of New Orleans. With this canal in operation, New Orleans will possess to the fullest degree the three great systems of port operation, public ownership and operation of the river harbor facilities, public ownership of the land and private operation of facilities on the industrial canal, and private ownership of the land and private operation of the facilities on the new channel to the sea. No other port in the country has the capacity for this trinity of port systems. No other port possesses such a hinterland as is embraced within the Mississippi Valley, nor so extensive and so complete a system of easy-grade railroads and navigable waterways penetrating its hinterland. No other port holds so strategic a position in the path of the new trade routes connecting the region of greatest productivity with the new markets of greatest promise in Latin America and the Orient. Construction costs and contractors. Everything is relative. Looking at the total, some may think that the cost of the industrial canal is large. So it is, compared with the cost of an irrigation ditch through a 20-acre farm. But comparing the cost with the wealth it is invested to produce, has already begun to produce, it dwindles to a mere percentage. And a comparison of construction costs on the industrial canal with similar work done elsewhere during the same time is very much in favor of the former. Witness the following figures shown in the books of the engineering department of the Dock Board. Dredging, including the canal prism and the excavation of the sites of the bridge foundations, siphon and lock, averaged 27.84 cents a cubic yard. The highest cost was in the lock section, from which 609,032 cubic yards were excavated at an average cost of 3.796 cents a cubic yard. On the siphon and Florida walk bridge section, including two other deep cuts, the 814,019 cubic yards excavated cost an average of 2.27 cents a cubic yard. On the Louisville and Nashville Bridge section, the 1,023,466 cubic yards excavated cost an average of 2,000, 23,000, 20,000. From there to the lake, 1,607,707 cubic yards, the average cost was 2.411 cents. Dredging costs were below the original estimates when labor and supplies were 50% cheaper. The 90,000 cubic yards of concrete in the lock cost an average of $22.50 a cubic yard. This includes cost of material, mixing, building forms, pouring and stripping forms. Mixing and pouring, from the time the material was handled from the storehouse or pile, averaged $1.20. $1.20 a cubic yard. It would be hard to find cheaper concrete on a work of similar magnitude anywhere, say the engineers. On the siphon, the concrete work cost more, because it was a subterranean job with elaborate shaping. The price there was $35 a cubic yard, in place, including material and form work. To drive the 17,000 bearing piles and 7,000 traveling piles on which the lock is floated cost an average of 15 cents a running foot. This does not include the cost of the piling. Construction steel cost 12 cents a pound, and erection around 4 cents. These were standard prices. The lock gates, weighing 5,000 to 85,000 pounds, cost $846 in place. This does not include opening and closing machinery. 3 of the bascule bridges crossing the canal, weighing 1,600,000 pounds each, cost $250,000 each, erected. Erected. The 4th bridge near the lock, weighing 1,000 pounds, cost $200,000 erected. This is for superstructure only. It does not include the foundation. The emergency dam bridge, weighing 350,373 pounds, and its 108,256 pounds of turning machinery, cost $96,728 in place. Hoisting machinery cost $40,000 more. The 8 girders of the emergency dam, weighing 90 tons each, at $240 a ton, cost $172,800. Machinery for working the 10 lock gates, the 8 filling gates, and the 6 capstans, 24 52-horsepower electric motors, cost $21,450 New Orleans. The plant for unwatering the lock, consisting of 1 pump with a capacity of 15,000 gallons a minute and 2 with a capacity of 250 gallons each, cost, erected, $11,000. Total mechanical equipment used on the industrial canal weighs 14,500 tons. Its cost, including powerhouse, electrical connections, etc., is $1,516,000. Plant and equipment for building the canal, including locomotives, cranes, pile drivers, dredges, tools, etc., cost $781,232. Depreciation, up to February 1921, is set at $260,684, leaving a balance of $514,030.58 carried as assets. Much of this has already been sold, and more will be disposed of. Following are the firms that executed contracts on the industrial canal. Outside New Orleans: lock gates and emergency dam girders, McClintock, Marshall Construction Company, Pittsburgh, PA, designed by Goldmark and Harris Company, New York. Filling gates, Coffin Valve Company, Indian Orchard, Mass. Miscellaneous valve equipment, Ludlow Valve Company, Troy, NY. Capstans, American Engineering Company, Philadelphia, PA. Mooring posts, Shipbuilding Products Company, New York, NY. Mitergate Moving Machines, Focus Machine Works, Pittsburgh, PA. Motors, control boards, and miscellaneous electrical equipment, General Electric Company, Schenectady, NY. Bridge crane and bascule bridges, Bethlehem Steel Corporation, Steelton, PA. Former design by Goldmark and Harris Company, New York, NY. Latter by Strauss Bascule Bridge Company, Chicago, Ill. Steel sheet piling, Lackawanna Steel Company, Buffalo, New York. Hoists and cranes, Orton and Steinbrenner, Huntington, Ind., and American Hoist and Derrick Company, St. Paul, Minn. Conveyor equipment, Webster Company, Tiffany, Ohio, Barker Green Company, Aurora, Ill. Woodworking machinery, Fay and Egan Company, Cincinnati, Ohio. Pipe, U.S. Cast Iron Pipe Company, Birmingham, Allah. Lumber and piling, Hammond Lumber Company, Hammond, La. Old La, Great Southern Lumber Company, Bogalusa, La. Dredges, Bowers Southern Dredging Company, Galveston, Tex. Atlantic, Gulf, and Pacific Company, Mobile, Allah. In New Orleans: Cinder and Earth Fill, Thomas M. Johnson. Levy Work, Hercules Construction Company, Hampton Reynolds. Sand and Gravel, Jonkey Service Inc., D. V. Johnston Company. Cement, Atlas Portland Cement Company, the Michel Lumber and Brick Company being local agents. Lumber and Piling, Salmon, Brick and Lumber Company, W. 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 Carey Company, Ltd. Coal, Kirkpatrick Coal Company, Tennessee, Coal, Iron, and R. Company. Reinforcing Steel and Supplies, Tennessee Coal, Iron, and R. Company, Ole K. Olson. Rail and Track Accessories, A. Marks and Sons. Concrete Mixers, Fairbanks Company. Repairs and Castings, Debert, Bancroft and Ross, Jobert and Goslin. Machinery and Foundry Company, Stern, Foundry and Machinery Company. Other port facilities. New Orleans, says Dr. Roy S. McElwee in his book on port and terminal facilities, a subject on which he is considered an authority, is the most advanced port in America in respect to scientific policy. The Shipping Board echoed the compliment in its report of its port and harbor facilities Commission of April 1919, when it said, New Orleans ranks high among the ports of the United States for volume of business, and presents a very successful example of the public ownership and operation of port facilities. It is one of the best equipped and coordinated ports of the country. New Orleans is the principal freshwater ocean harbor in the United States. Landlocked and protected from storms, it is the safest harbor on the Gulf Coast. Almost unlimited is the number of vessels that can be accommodated at anchor. Alongside the wharves, the water is from 30 to 70 feet deep. The government maintains a 33-foot channel at the mouth of the river. The Port of New Orleans takes in about 21 miles of this harbor on both sides of the river. This gives a river frontage of 4 miles, which is under the jurisdiction of the Dock Board, an agency of the state. The board has, to date, improved 7 miles of the east bank of the river with wharves, steel sheds, cotton warehouses, a grain elevator, and a coal handling plant of most modern type, together with other facilities for loading and unloading. Authority has been granted to issue $60 million in bonds for increasing these facilities. Wharves, elevators, and warehouses built by railroads and industrial plants on both sides of the river bring up the total improved portion of the port to 45,000 linear feet, capable of berthing 90 vessels 500 feet long. These facilities are coordinated by the only municipally owned and operated belt railroad in the United States, which saves the shipper much money. More than 60 steamship lines connect the port with the world markets, the government barge line, a number of steamboat lines, and 12 railroad lines connected with the producing and consuming sections of the United States. Now nearing completion is the public coal handling plant. Built by the Dock Board to develop the business in cargo coal, it is costing more than $1 million. Otter Zero and will have a capacity of 25,000 tons. Otter Zero in air will have a capacity of 25,000 tons. 1. Unload coal from railway cars into a storage pile. 2. Unload coal from cars into steamers or barges. 3. Load coal from storage pile into steamers or barges. 4. Unload coal from barges into steamers and storage pile. At the 750-foot wharf, the plant can take care of 3 ships at one time, with a maximum loading capacity of 800 to 1,000 tons an hour. Other coaling facilities at the port are furnished by Illinois Central Railroad, Tipple, with capacity of 300 tons an hour. New Orleans Coal Company, 2 tipples, capacity 150 and 350 tons an hour. Floating collier to coal ships while freight is being taken aboard at the wharf, capacity 1,075 tons an hour. Collier, capacity. Alabama and New Orleans Transportation Company, storage plant with loading towers on Lake Bourne Canal, just below the city. American Sugar Refining Company, coal plant, capacity 70 tons an hour, for receiving coal from barges and delivering it to boiler house. Monongahela River Coal and Coke Company, floating collier. Fuel oil facilities for bunkering purposes are furnished by Gulf Refining Company, storage capacity 100,000 barrels, bunkering capacity 800 barrels an hour. Texas Oil Company, storage capacity 150,000 barrels, bunkering capacity of 500 barrels an hour. Mexican Petroleum Corporation, bunkering capacity 1,500 barrels an hour. Sinclair Refining Company, storage capacity 250,000 barrels, bunkering capacity 2,500 barrels an hour. Standard Oil Company, storage capacity 100,000 3036 barrels, bunkering capacity 1,000 barrels an hour. In the Jockey Dry Dock and Ship Repair Company, New Orleans has the largest ship repair plant south of Newport News. The plant is on the Mississippi River, adjacent to the Industrial Canal. It has a 1,000 Fifth Ward wharf and 3 dry docks of 6,000, 8,000, and 10,000 tons capacity, respectively. These can be joined for lifting the very large ships. It is equipped with the latest and most powerful machinery and has been a strong factor in developing the port. The Johnson Iron Works and Shipbuilding Company likewise has facilities for wood repairing, caulking, painting, and scraping of vessels, as well as ironwork. It has 3 docks, 1,234 feet long, 1,334 feet long, and a small one for lifting barges and small river tugs. At the United States Naval Yard is a dock of 15,000 tons capacity. This is placed at the service of commercial vessels when private docks are not available. The public cotton warehouse and public grain elevator are among the most modern facilities in the country. Both plants are of reinforced concrete throughout, ensuring a low insurance rate. The cotton warehouse comprises 5 units with a total storage capacity at one time of 320,000 bales and an annual handling capacity of 2,000. High-density presses compress this cotton to 34 pounds per cubic foot, saving the exporter 20% on steamship freight rates. The insurance rate on storage cotton is 24 cents per 100 a year. Cotton is handled by dock board employees licensed by the New Orleans Cotton Exchange under rules and regulations laid down by the Department of Agriculture. Warehouse receipts may be discounted at the banks. Cotton can be handled cheaper here than at any other warehouse in the country. Storage capacity of the public grain elevator is 2,062,000 bushels. This is about 25% of the grain elevator storage capacity of the port, but the public elevator handles 60% of the business, proving its efficiency. Its unloading capacity is 60,000 bushels a day from barges or ships, and 200,000 bushels from cars. Loading capacity into ships is 100,000 bushels an hour, to 1 or 4 vessels simultaneously. Fireproof and equipped with a modern dust collecting system, this facility is considered one of the best in the country. Other grain elevators at New Orleans are operated by Southern Railway, capacity 375,000 bushels. Illinois Central Railroad, 2 elevators, capacity 2 billion and wide bushels, although Trans-Mississippi Terminal Railroad Company, 2 elevators, capacity 1,350,000 bushels. Wharves owned and controlled by the Dock Board measure 28,872 linear feet in length, with an area of 4,238,894 square feet. 20 of these 34 wharves are covered with steel sheds. Wharves operated by the railroads on both sides of the river increase the port facilities as follows. Southern Railway, 2 concrete and steel-covered docks, 1 a 2-story structure, 1 is 150 by 1,300 feet with a floor space of 105,000 square feet, 1 is 150 by 1,600 feet prockets, or 200 RE feet on the lower floor, and 150 by 1 with a combined area of 453,000 square feet floor space. Illinois Central Railroad, covered wharf, 13250 by 4,739 feet. Morgan's, Louisiana and Texas Railroad and Steamship Company, wharf space, 112,000 square feet, covered space, 117,200 square feet. Trans-Mississippi Terminal Railroad Company, wharf number 1, 3 berths, 281,904 square feet. Number 2, 1 berth, 94,050 square feet. Number 3, 1 berth, 100,705 square feet. 100,000 square feet. The New Orleans Army Supply Base has a 2-story wharf, 2,000 feet long by 140 feet wide. The lower floor of the wharf is leased by the dock board. Back of it are the 3 warehouses, each 140 by 600 feet and 6 stories in height. 7 industrial plants have loading and unloading facilities on the river. The dock board does not lease or part with the control of these and controls the following charges: harbor fees, dockage, sheddage, wharfage, etc. Open storage on riverfront contiguous to wharves totals 1,069,900 square feet. There is a great deal of potential open storage space away from the wharves and along railroad tracks, which could be reached by switches. For the storage of coffee, alcohol, sisal, sugar, and general commodities, private warehouses offer a floor space of 2 million square feet. Railroads serving New Orleans are the Public Belt, Illinois Central, Yazoo and Mississippi Valley, Gulf Coast Lines, Louisiana Railway and Navigation Company, Louisville and Nashville, Louisiana, Southern Missouri Pacific, Texas and Pacific, New Orleans and Lower Coast, Southern Pacific, Southern Railway and New Orleans and Great Northern. Storage track capacity of New Orleans for export traffic totals 15,015 cars. Track facilities alongside the wharves will accommodate 600 cars. New Orleans can handle at the grain elevators and wharves 3,000 cars a day. Wharves are served exclusively by the Public Belt Railroad. The Industrial Canal will be similarly served. The Public Belt Railroad assumes the obligations of a common carrier, operating under appropriate traffic rules and regulations. On uncompressed cotton and linters, the charge is $4.50. The government barge line connects New Orleans with the Warrior River section of Alabama and the upper Mississippi Valley, including a great deal of inland territory to which river and rail differential rates apply as far as St. Louis. There is a weekly service. Rates are 20% cheaper than rail rates. The port is supplied with some of the most modern freight handling machinery. Harbor dues and other expenses are low. The water supply, for drinking purposes and boilers, meets the strongest tests. How advantageously situated is New Orleans will be seen from the following comparison of distances. Comparison of distances by and between New Orleans and New York and principal cities. Distances in statute miles furnished by War Department. New York, New Orleans, Atlanta 846, 498, Baltimore 1881, 84, Birmingham 1043, 3415, Denver 1, 192, Dallas 1, 315, Dallas and 7, Buffalo 442, 9, 275, Charleston 739, 776, Chattanooga, Olep 36, 2730, 3 Tiny 1, 340, El Paso 2, 3 Tiny 1, Exive Galveston 1, 782, 41, Indianapolis 827, A Tiny 1, Norfolk Crowes A Tiny 4 Tiny 77, Miney 1 4 Tiny 345 87, Little Rock Miney 1 90 48 7, Louisville 877 49, Memphis 1, Wright 94, A7E, Shady 1, Port Townsend 3, 99 2, 979, Portland, Oregon 3, 242, 746, Salt Lake City 24T 174, 41, 928, San Antonio 1, 94T 57 1, San Francisco 3, 1912, 48 2, Savannah 84T5, 661, Seattle 3, 45 2050, 70,000. Comparison of distances by water routes between New Orleans and New York to principal ports of the world. Distances in nautical miles supplied by Hydrographic Office, Navy Department. Land routes in statute miles supplied by War Department. New York, New Orleans, Antwerp 3 3025, 4 853, Bombay, via Suez 8 29 53 6, via Cape of Good Hope 11 250, 11 850, 11 858, Buenos Aires 5 868, 6 380, Callao, via Panama 3 392 2, 981 1 3080, Havana 827597, Hong Kong, via Panama 231, 10, 831, and 230, 27, Manila 35 to San Francisco 9, 2077, 8, V68, Honolulu 35, Karana 3068, Honolulu, via Panama 668, 6, 6, 771, HA, 1 Port Townsend 9, 192, 8, 972, Melbourne 12 9T first 7 firsty 2 9 firsty 2 1 9 afty 2 2 may I mine H first T 2 may I 1 9 firsty 2 1 mine H 9 ol 2 8 1.79 1 T 2 4 via Tehanti, Alaska, Ada via San Francisco 5 896 5 187, Ada via Port Townsend 5 555, 335 via 5 via Panama 8 W1 7 410 7 410, Panama Western End Canal via Canal and colon 2 028 27, Pernambuco, Brazil 369 1 428 1 539, Singapore, via Yokohama and Panama, 113, 1 other 12, 5 other 3, via Suez 10, Falares over 35, 1 other 35, Lun Falares 91, 2, 4A82, via T, via Tehuantepec, Asphal, Thal 482, via Tehuantepec, 4, Fa 195, via Honolulu and Panama, 10 019 9 492, via Panama 9 869 9 268. ATA, by land and water. B, by land, in by, Sletter. Thanks for listening to Industrial Canal and Inner Harbor of New Orleans.